My 15-year-old daughter spent 12 agonizing hours on her feet, crafting a gourmet menu for 35 relatives just to celebrate my mother's 60th birthday. Then my phone lit up with a text message from my mother. Change of plans. We are eating at a restaurant instead. Adults only. I did not scream or argue. I sent a polite text back and made a single phone call. By the next morning, she would be sobbing on my doorstep, begging for a second chance. I stood leaning against the doorframe of my kitchen, watching my daughter Aaliyah wipe a heavy smudge of white flour from her forehead with the back of her wrist. She was 15 years old, but she moved around the kitchen workspace with the precision and quiet grace of a seasoned executive chef. The air in our house was thick with the incredible savory aroma of slow-braised beef, short ribs simmering in a rich bourbon peach glaze. Beside the stove sat 24 smoked Gouda and collard green tartlets, resting perfectly on a wire cooling rack. She had been awake since 4 in the morning, carefully executing a 3-course Southern fusion menu that she had spent weeks designing and perfecting. This was not just a meal to her. This was her grand presentation for her grandmother Yvonne's 60th birthday dinner. 35 relatives were scheduled to arrive at our house at 6 in the evening, and Aaliyah wanted everything to be absolutely flawless for them. I smiled, feeling a profound swell of pride tight in my chest. Aaliyah had even used her own babysitting money to supplement our grocery budget, wanting to buy the highest quality saffron and the freshest organic herbs from the specialty market. She was so desperate to impress a grandmother who rarely gave her a second glance. Aaliyah chopped fresh parsley with a steady rhythm, her shoulders dropping slightly from the physical exhaustion of standing on the hard tile floor all day, but her eyes were shining with bright anticipation. At exactly 4 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed loudly against the marble kitchen island. I picked it up expecting a text from my sister Jasmine, asking if she needed to pick up extra ice or paper napkins on her way over to our house. Instead, the notification was a group message from my mother Yvonne sent to the entire extended family chat. I opened the message and felt the blood freeze in my veins. Change of plans, everyone. We are eating at the Obsidian Room instead. I managed to secure a last-minute reservation for the family. Adults only tonight. Aaliyah's food is a bit too heavy for Connor's parents anyway, and we really want to impress them. See you all there at 7. I stared at the glowing screen, reading the harsh words over and over until the letters blurred together. My mother knew perfectly well that Aaliyah had been cooking all day long. My mother was the one who explicitly demanded the premium short ribs. She was the one who insisted on a massive guest list of 35 people, forcing us to buy extra chairs. And now, exactly 2 hours before the party was supposed to start, she was canceling the entire event through a casual group text message. She was moving her birthday dinner to the most exclusive and expensive restaurant in all of Atlanta, and she was explicitly excluding my 15-year-old daughter because her homemade food was considered too heavy and unrefined for my sister Jasmine's wealthy white in-laws. Aaliyah turned around from the stove, wiping her hands on her stained apron. Her bright eyes searched my face, sensing the sudden shift in the room. "Is Grandma on her way?" she asked excitedly, shifting her weight from one tired foot to the other. "Should I start plating the tartlets so they are warm when people walk in?" I did not give a dramatic speech. I did not launch into a long, exhausting monologue about how my mother had always treated me this exact same way. I simply walked over to the stove, turned off the heavy gas burners, and looked at my beautiful, hardworking daughter. The excitement drained from her face, instantly replaced by a sudden, heartbreaking understanding that something was terribly wrong. "What happened, Mom?" she whispered, stepping back from the counter. I picked up my phone and read the message aloud, keeping my voice steady and clear so she could hear exactly what was written. I watched as Aaliyah's proud, hopeful smile completely shattered into a million pieces. Her shoulders slumped forward, and she looked down at the massive, heavy pot of short ribs she had tenderly cared for over the last 12 hours. The $400 worth of premium ingredients my mother had demanded we buy suddenly looked like a pile of meaningless garbage. Aaliyah pulled off her apron and threw it onto the counter, hiding her face in her hands as the first heavy sob shook her small frame. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth physically ached. I grabbed a stack of large plastic containers from the pantry and began packing up the food. I scooped the short ribs, the sweet potato puree, and the beautiful tartlets into the bins with quick, sharp movements. "Why does she always do this to us?" Aaliyah cried, wiping her wet cheeks aggressively. "I did everything exactly how she asked me to. I even bought the expensive ingredients she wanted so Connor's parents would like it and think we were good enough." I snapped a plastic lid onto a container and looked my daughter right in the eyes. "This is not about your cooking, Aaliyah," I said firmly, keeping my voice grounded. "This is about your grandmother making sure your Aunt Jasmine looks like high society tonight. You know exactly how Yvonne operates. Jasmine married Connor and moved into that massive gated community, so now Yvonne worships the ground they walk on. She thinks because Connor comes from old money that they are some kind of royalty. She looks at us working hard in a kitchen, and all she sees is the help. But she gave me the guest list." Aaliyah protested, her voice cracking with fresh tears. "She told me 35 people. She called me yesterday to confirm the menu. She used you for a backup plan." I told her, sliding the heavy containers into the refrigerator to preserve them. "She probably begged for a reservation at the Obsidian Room months ago and only kept you cooking today, just in case they could not accommodate her large party." The absolute second she got the call that a table opened up, she dropped us without a single second thought. She wants to sit in a glass room and play the role of a wealthy aristocrat for Connor's parents, and she genuinely thinks a black single mother and her teenage daughter do not fit that elegant aesthetic she is trying to sell them. It was a bitter, ugly truth I had swallowed for my entire life. While Yvonne had praised Jasmine's every superficial move, paying for her luxury vacations, and bragging loudly about her corporate husband, she had always treated my hard work as invisible labor. Whenever I achieved something great, it was immediately dismissed or belittled. Now she was passing that exact same generational disrespect down to my daughter. And that was where I finally drew the line. I was not going to let Aaliyah spend the rest of her life chasing the approval of a woman who viewed her as a prop to be discarded when something shinier came along. I walked around the kitchen island and pulled Aaliyah into a tight, protective hug. I felt her crying against my shoulder, and I let her let it out for exactly 1 minute. Then I pulled back and wiped the tears from her face with my thumbs. "Go upstairs and wash your face," I told her, brushing the white flour from her cheek. "Then go to your closet and put on the absolute best dress you own." Aaliyah looked at me in pure confusion, wiping her nose. "Why? Where are we going tonight?" I picked up my phone and opened the family group chat. I saw messages from aunts and uncles happily confirming they would meet at the restaurant, completely ignoring the massive fact that my daughter had just wasted 12 hours of her life cooking for them. They were tossing thumbs up emojis and talking about what they were going to wear. I typed a single polite reply into the chat and hit send. "No worries at all. Enjoy the dinner." I set the phone face down on the counter. Then I stepped out through the back door onto our patio, leaving Aaliyah standing in the kitchen. The evening air was warm, but I felt entirely cold inside. I pulled up my contacts and dialed a private unlisted number that I rarely ever used. It rang exactly twice before a highly professional voice answered on the other end. I spoke quietly, giving 2 brief, strict instructions that took less than 30 seconds to fully convey. I listened to the respectful confirmation on the other end, thanked the person, and ended the call. When I walked back inside the house, Aaliyah was still standing by the kitchen island, holding her ruined apron in her hands. She looked lost, trying to process the casual cruelty of her own grandmother. I grabbed my car keys from the metal hook by the door and picked up my favorite leather handbag. I looked at my daughter and felt a deep, powerful calm wash over my entire body. The days of protecting my family from the natural consequences of their own arrogance were officially over. "Grab your coat, baby," I said, my voice ringing with absolute authority. "We are going to the Obsidian Room, and we are not eating in the back." The drive into downtown Atlanta was a quiet one. I kept the radio turned down low, letting the hum of the tires against the pavement fill the silence in the car. I glanced over at the passenger seat. Aaliyah was staring out the window, watching the city lights blur past us. She was wearing a beautiful emerald green dress that she had bought with her own allowance money a few months ago. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, but her fingers were trembling slightly. She was 15 years old, and she had just had her heart broken by the one woman who was supposed to offer her unconditional grandmotherly love. I reached across the center console and placed my hand firmly over hers. I gave her fingers a tight, reassuring squeeze. She looked over at me and offered a fragile, brave smile. I did not say a word because words were no longer required. Tonight was about action. Tonight was about showing my daughter that nobody gets to dictate our worth or relegate us to the background. We pulled up to the imposing front entrance of the Obsidian Room. It was exactly as intimidating as its reputation suggested. The exterior was sleek black marble with massive brass doors that stood guard like the gates of a fortress. High-end luxury vehicles lined the valet stand. People dressed in designer labels clustered near the entrance, desperately hoping for a table cancellation. The Obsidian Room was known across the entire state as the ultimate playground for the elite. Getting a reservation here took months of planning or serious political connections. The minimum spend per plate alone was enough to deter the average person. I tossed my keys to the valet without missing a beat and guided Aaliyah up the wide stone steps. The moment we stepped inside the heavy brass doors, the chaotic noise of the city street faded away completely, replaced by the low ambient hum of extreme wealth. The lighting was purposely dim, casting a warm golden glow over the dark mahogany wood and crushed velvet booths. The air smelled of expensive wine and seared Wagyu beef. It was an atmosphere designed to make you feel either incredibly powerful or entirely out of place. Aaliyah stepped closer to me, her eyes wide as she took in the sheer opulence of the dining room. I kept my posture completely straight and my chin high. I ignored the host stand completely. The sharply dressed young woman behind the podium opened her mouth to ask if we had a reservation, but I simply walked past her with an unyielding stride. I knew exactly where I was going. I guided Aaliyah past the crowded bar and navigated through the labyrinth of tables toward the very back of the establishment. That was where the real exclusivity lay. Separated from the main dining floor by thick velvet ropes and a dedicated security presence, was a raised platform featuring private glass-enclosed dining rooms. These soundproof boxes were designed for high-profile clients who wanted to be seen by the public but entirely insulated from them. Through the thick glass of the largest VIP room, I immediately spotted them. My mother Yvonne sat at the head of the long polished table, looking like a queen presiding over her court. She wore a tailored cream suit and a heavy pearl necklace, her hair styled to absolute perfection. To her right sat my sister Jasmine, draped in an ostentatious silk dress and leaning heavily against her husband Connor. Connor wore a bespoke navy suit that screamed old money privilege. They were laughing, sipping champagne and looking incredibly pleased with themselves. They looked like a living, breathing advertisement for fake affluent bliss. I unhooked the velvet rope myself, let Aaliyah step through, and pushed the heavy glass door open. The sudden sound of the door sliding on its metal track cut through their laughter like a knife. All three heads snapped in our direction. For a fraction of a second, the sheer shock on their faces was absolute perfection. Yvonne froze with her champagne glass halfway to her mouth. Jasmine's eyes bulged so wide they nearly popped out of her head. "What in the world are you doing here?" Jasmine shrieked, her voice entirely too loud for the elegant setting. She slammed her glass down on the table, causing the expensive liquid to slosh over the rim. Connor immediately stood up from his chair, smoothing his expensive suit jacket as if he needed to physically assert his dominance over the space. His face hardened into a scowl of pure annoyance. He took a step forward, positioning himself between us and the table like a bouncer. "Kendra, this is a private reservation." Connor said, his tone dripping with the kind of smug condescension that only a wealthy white man speaking to a working-class black woman could muster. "You cannot just barge in here. I highly doubt you even slipped past the host stand legally. I did not take a single step back. I looked Connor dead in the eye and held my ground. We came to celebrate my mother's 60th birthday. I said, my voice perfectly calm and level. That was the original plan, was it not? Jasmine stood up next, practically vibrating with outrage. She pointed a manicured finger directly at Aaliyah. The text message clearly said, "Adults only Kendra. You brought a child to an exclusive dinner. This is exactly why we had to change the plans in the first place. You have absolutely no concept of social etiquette. Do you have any idea how much a single plate of food costs in this room? There is a $500 minimum spend just to breathe the air in this VIP section. A single mother with a catering side hustle has absolutely no business crashing a venue like this. You are going to humiliate us." Aaliyah shrank back slightly at her aunt's vicious words, but I kept my hand firmly on her shoulder, keeping her anchored to my side. She is right. Yvonne finally snapped, slamming her cloth napkin down onto the table. Her face was flushed with a mixture of anger and sheer panic. "Kendra, what is wrong with you? Connor's parents are arriving any minute now. Richard and Victoria are accustomed to a very specific standard of dining. They expect elegance. They expect sophistication. I will not have you and your teenager ruining this evening and making us look like common street people in front of my son-in-law's wealthy family. You need to turn around and walk out those doors right now before they walk in." I looked at the woman who had given birth to me. I looked at the sheer desperation in her eyes, the pathetic need to impress two wealthy white strangers at the direct expense of her own flesh and blood. She was willing to completely crush her granddaughter's spirit just to maintain an illusion of upper-crust status. "I am not going anywhere, Yvonne," I said, dropping the title of mother completely. "And neither is Aaliyah." Yvonne's face contorted with absolute fury. Her obsession with projecting a flawless high society image had completely overridden whatever tiny shred of maternal instinct she had left. She refused to let my presence jeopardize her performance for Connor's parents. "Fine," Yvonne hissed, her eyes narrowing into cold, hateful slits. "If you will not leave voluntarily, I will have you thrown out." She turned her head toward the glass door and aggressively snapped her fingers at a passing server. It was a loud, sharp, utterly disrespectful sound. The young waiter stopped immediately, looking startled. "You there," Yvonne barked, pointing a demanding finger at the young man. "Go fetch your general manager immediately. Tell him I have trespassers invading my private VIP reservation, and I want them physically removed from the premises before my actual guests arrive. Go on, hurry up." The waiter hurried off, looking incredibly uncomfortable. Jasmine crossed her arms over her chest and smirked at me, a look of pure triumphant venom on her face. "You really brought this on yourself, Kendra," Jasmine sneered. "You just could not stand the fact that Mom wanted to celebrate in a place you could never afford. You are about to be escorted out by security in front of the entire restaurant. I hope your little catering hobby pays enough to cover the valet ticket on your way out." Connor chuckled, shaking his head as he looked me up and down with blatant disgust. "This is exactly why my parents prefer a certain type of crowd," he muttered loud enough for me to hear. "Always causing a scene. Always looking for a handout." I stood there in the center of the glass room, completely unfazed by their cruel insults. I could feel Aaliyah tense beside me, her breath catching in her throat as she anticipated the humiliation of being thrown out of the restaurant. I gently stroked her shoulder, letting her know that she was completely safe. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend my finances. I simply waited. Less than 30 seconds later, the heavy glass door slid open again. The general manager stepped into the room. He was a tall, impeccably dressed man in a tailored charcoal suit named David. He moved with swift professional urgency, holding a sleek digital reservation tablet in his hands. Yvonne immediately launched into her demands before David could even fully enter the space. "Manager," Yvonne commanded, using her most aristocratic and demanding tone. "I am the primary contact for this VIP reservation. These two individuals have completely crashed our private family dinner. They are not authorized to be in this glass room, and they are refusing to leave. I demand that you have security escort them out of the building immediately before my wealthy in-laws arrive and see this absolute mess." Jasmine nodded enthusiastically, backing up her mother's demands. Yes, please remove them. They are disturbing our dining experience. David stopped in the middle of the room. He did not call for security. He did not look at me with disdain or annoyance. He did not ask to see my identification or question my presence in the exclusive VIP section. Instead, David looked at Yvonne with a perfectly blank expression. Then he slowly turned his body to face me. He stepped forward, closing the distance between us. In front of my mother, my sister, and my arrogant brother-in-law, David bowed his head slightly in a gesture of absolute profound respect. He held out the glowing master reservation tablet, presenting it to me with both hands. Is everything to your liking tonight, boss? The absolute silence that fell over the glass-enclosed dining room was profound. For several long seconds, the only sound was the faint clinking of silverware from the main dining floor below us. I watched the arrogant smirk completely melt off my sister Jasmine's face. Connor looked like he had been physically struck by a freight train. His mouth hung slightly open, his eyes darting between me and David, the general manager, in sheer confusion. I reached out and calmly took the glowing master reservation tablet from David's hands. I did not break eye contact with my mother Yvonne as I did it. Everything is running perfectly, David, I said, my voice steady and commanding. Though it appears we have a slight seating issue with this particular party. Yvonne finally found her voice, though it was a weak, trembling sound that lacked all of her usual aristocratic authority. Boss, she repeated the words, stumbling out of her mouth like it tasted like ash. Kendra, what kind of sick joke is this? How much did you pay this man to call you that? I stepped further into the room and let the heavy glass door slide shut behind me, sealing us in. I am not paying him to play a role, Yvonne. I pay him his six-figure salary because he runs the front-of-house operations for the hospitality group that owns this restaurant. A hospitality group that I built from the ground up. I am the silent majority owner of the Obsidian Room. In fact, I own the entire building. I watched the reality of my words crash over them wave by devastating wave. Jasmine sank back into her velvet chair, her hands shaking as she clutched her expensive silk dress. This entire elite establishment, the $500 minimum spend, the impossible waiting list, the luxury that they were desperately trying to use to impress Connor's wealthy white parents, it was all mine. The culinary empire she had spent her entire life mocking as my little catering side hustle had funded the very walls surrounding them. That is impossible! Jasmine breathed, her voice high and panicked. You run a catering business out of a strip mall. You wear an apron. You smell like garlic and onions. You do not own the Obsidian Room. I tapped the screen of the tablet, casually scrolling through the floor plan. I moved my corporate offices out of that strip mall 5 years ago, Jasmine. I employ over 300 people across the state of Georgia. I just prefer to keep my name off the press releases so I can cook in peace without dealing with social climbers who only care about status, people exactly like you. Connor bristled, his face turning a blotchy shade of red. He puffed out his chest, trying to regain some semblance of control over the situation. This is ridiculous, he scoffed, adjusting his tie. Even if you somehow own a fraction of this place, we have a confirmed reservation for this VIP room. My parents will be here any minute and they expect privacy. You cannot just come in here and disrupt paying customers. I looked at Connor and let a cold, slow smile spread across my face. I am not disrupting paying customers, Connor. I am correcting a logistical error. I looked down at the tablet. With 2 swift taps of my finger, I accessed their reservation under Yvonne's name. I highlighted it and dragged it from the VIP glass enclosure section all the way down to a small 2-top table located right next to the swinging kitchen doors. I am not kicking you out, I said, looking back up at my mother. I would never want to ruin your 60th birthday dinner. But this room is no longer available to you. I have just downgraded your reservation to table 42 on the main floor. It is right by the kitchen entrance. You will have a wonderful view of the busboys bringing in the dirty dishes. This VIP room is now exclusively reserved for my daughter Aaliyah, so she can enjoy a private tasting menu in peace. Aaliyah gasped softly beside me. I glanced down and saw her standing taller, her emerald green dress catching the warm light of the chandelier. The crushing sadness that had weighed her down at home was completely gone, replaced by absolute awe. Yvonne's face turned a dark, furious shade of purple. She slammed both of her hands flat on the table, causing the crystal water glasses to rattle. "You will do no such thing, Kendra," she demanded, her voice rising to a frantic pitch. "I am your mother. You owe me respect. You would not even have a single spatula to your name if it were not for me. I funded your very first kitchen setup. I gave you the money to start your pathetic little business when nobody else believed in you. You are going to give us this room right now, or so help me God." I held up a single hand, stopping her frantic rant completely dead in its tracks. I had waited a decade for this exact moment. For 10 years, Yvonne had held that single solitary loan over my head. It was a meager $2,000 she had lent me when I was 22 years old, trying to buy my first set of commercial baking racks. She brought it up at every Thanksgiving dinner, every Christmas morning, every family barbecue. She used it as permanent proof that I was a charity case, a helpless single mother who needed her gracious salvation. She weaponized that money to keep me beneath her. I calmly pulled my personal cell phone from my handbag. I opened my secure banking application and navigated to my archived digital records. I had kept this specific document saved in my favorites for years, waiting for the day she would try to use it against me one last time. I stepped forward and smoothly slid my phone across the polished mahogany table, stopping it right in front of Yvonne's face. The screen was glaringly bright. "Look at the screen, Yvonne," I commanded, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet register. "Look at the date and look at the amount." Yvonne glared at me before dropping her gaze to the phone. Jasmine leaned over, straining her neck to see what was on the screen. "That is a certified bank transfer from exactly 10 years ago," I explained, ensuring Connor could hear every single word. "I paid back your $2,000 loan within my first 6 months of operation. But I did not just pay back $2,000. I paid you $20,000. I repaid your initial investment tenfold, with interest explicitly, so you could never say I owed you a single dime for the rest of my natural life." Yvonne's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She stared at the digital receipt, proving her entire narrative of my financial dependence was a complete and utter fabrication. "You took that $20,000 and you used it to buy Jasmine a down payment on her first luxury car." I continued, exposing the ugly truth right in front of her golden child. "And then you spent the next 10 years telling the entire extended family that I was still struggling to pay you back. You lied to everyone to make yourself look like a savior and to make me look like a failure. That ends tonight. You do not own me. You do not own my business. And you certainly do not own my daughter." The silence in the VIP room was heavy enough to crush bone. Jasmine looked at her mother in shock, realizing that the luxury car she had bragged about for years was actually paid for by my sweat and my labor in a hot kitchen. Yvonne shrank back into her chair, her aristocratic posture completely collapsing under the weight of her exposed lies. But Connor was not finished. His fragile ego could not handle the fact that a black woman standing in front of him held more wealth and power than he did. He let out a harsh, bitter laugh, shaking his head in mock amusement. "Well, I guess diversity business loans are just handing out free real estate these days," Connor snarked, crossing his arms and leaning back. "It must be nice to check a few demographic boxes on an application and get a multi-million-dollar restaurant handed to you by the city. My parents had to actually work for their wealth, Kendra. Real wealth takes generations to build, not just a lucky handout from a government program." Aaliyah tensed beside me, anger flashing in her young eyes. I placed my hand on her back, keeping her steady. I did not scream at Connor. I did not call him a racist, even though the implication of his words hung in the air like toxic smoke. I did not need to defend my work ethic to a man who was drowning in his own manufactured illusions. Instead, I smiled. It was a cold, calculating smile that made the smugness falter on Connor's face. I picked up my phone from the table. I closed the banking application and opened my secure real estate portfolio management software. I tapped the screen a few times, pulling up a highly specific commercial property deed. I made sure the document was fully loaded with the official state seals visible at the top of the page. I turned the screen toward Connor, holding it steady so he could read the address printed clearly in bold black letters. "You are absolutely right, Connor," I said, my voice smooth and razor sharp. "Real wealth does take hard work to build, which is exactly why my hospitality and investment group recently expanded our portfolio into commercial high-rise properties in the downtown financial district. In fact, we just acquired the Sterling Plaza building last month." Connor's face instantly drained of all color, turning a sickly shade of pale gray. His arms uncrossed and fell to his sides. The address on my phone screen was not just any commercial building. It was the exact high-rise building that housed his highly successful technology startup. "You might want to read the name of the new property management company listed on your lease agreement, Connor." I continued, leaning slightly over the table. "Because you are not paying rent to a faceless corporate conglomerate anymore. You are paying it to me. And according to my accountants, you are currently 3 months behind." Connor stood completely frozen in the center of the VIP dining room. The ambient light of the crystal chandelier caught the sudden slick sheen of cold sweat forming along his hairline. He opened his mouth to speak, but the arrogant words seemed to die instantly in his throat. For years he had paraded around our family gatherings in his custom Italian suits, loudly offering unsolicited financial advice to anyone who would listen. He loved to position himself as the brilliant tech visionary who was far too busy innovating to bother with trivial things like humility or basic respect. Now the great corporate innovator was suffocating under the crushing weight of his own massive ego. I took a slow, deliberate step toward him. My voice was calm, but it carried the absolute weight of undeniable authority. "Sterling Plaza is a highly prestigious commercial building, Connor," I said, letting the heavy silence in the glass room stretch out around my words. "It has panoramic views of the downtown skyline. It has private underground executive parking and dedicated elevator access. It is the absolute perfect place to house a booming technology startup if you actually have the capital to afford the prime square footage. But when my corporate acquisitions team flagged your specific suite during our quarterly portfolio review last week, they noticed a rather alarming financial pattern." He took a shaky step back, bumping hard against the edge of the dining table. The heavy crystal water glasses rattled loudly against the polished wood. "You have been aggressively dodging calls from my property managers for 90 straight days." I continued, locking my eyes onto his panicked face. "You have been making empty promises to the leasing office about incoming venture capital rounds that simply do not exist. That is highly confidential corporate information." He stammered, his voice pitching up an octave in pure, desperate panic. "You cannot legally discuss my internal business operations in the middle of a restaurant." "You brought up my business operations first," I reminded him softly, tilting my head. "You were the one who wanted to talk about diversity loans and government handouts. I am just keeping the conversation strictly professional between a landlord and a failing tenant. You owe my holding company exactly $84,000 in back rent and late fees. You are bleeding money, Connor. Your revolutionary tech startup is nothing but a hollow, failing shell." Jasmine let out a sharp, trembling gasp that sounded like she was physically choking on the air. She whipped her head around so fast her elaborate hairstyle shifted. She stared at her husband with eyes so wide with sheer terror I thought she might actually faint. For her entire adult life, Jasmine had relied exclusively on Connor's perceived wealth to elevate her own social status. She used his supposed massive fortune as a blunt weapon to beat down anyone she deemed beneath her, especially me. She had spent years flaunting her designer handbags, her exclusive country club memberships, and her lavish international vacations on social media every single day. She had meticulously constructed an entire personality around being the untouchable, ultra-wealthy elite wife. The illusion was her entire identity. "Connor, tell me she is lying right now," Jasmine pleaded, reaching out with shaking hands to grab his suit sleeve. "Tell me you did not miss the rent payments. You told me the company was preparing to go public next quarter. You promised me we were buying the vacation house in Aspen next month. Tell me this catering woman is making this all up to ruin my night." Connor violently yanked his arm away from her grasping fingers. He could not even look his own wife in the eye. He stared fixedly at the floor, his breathing ragged and uneven. He was completely exposed, stripped of all his arrogant armor. The silence that followed was entirely devastating. The dominoes were falling fast and hard, smashing into each other. The perfect affluent image my mother Yvonne had championed for Jasmine shattered instantly into a million irreparable pieces right in front of the extended family. The favored golden child was not married to a brilliant tech billionaire. She was married to a broke fraud who was mere days away from being legally locked out of his own office building. All those years Yvonne spent telling me I needed to find a man like Connor to secure my future. All those years of comparing my hard-earned financial independence to Jasmine's wealthy fairy tale were built on an absolute lie. Yvonne looked like she was going to be physically ill. Her chest heaved heavily as she processed the absolute destruction of her carefully curated social hierarchy. The grand narrative she had fiercely protected for decades was burning to the ground, and she was completely powerless to stop the flames. But instead of accepting the truth or showing an ounce of humility, Yvonne did what she always did when backed into a corner. She lashed out viciously. Desperate to regain any fragment of control, Yvonne lunged forward. She bypassed me entirely and reached directly for my daughter. She grabbed Aaliyah tightly by the wrist, attempting to physically pull the 15-year-old girl away from my side and toward her. "Aaliyah, you need to come with me right now," Yvonne hissed, her voice dripping with toxic, urgent manipulation. "Your mother has lost her absolute mind. She is ruining our family out of pure spite and deep-rooted jealousy. She cannot stand to see anyone else happy, so she is making up these vicious lies to destroy your Aunt Jasmine's beautiful marriage. Do not let her poison you against your real family. We love you, Aaliyah. Come sit with us and ignore this nonsense." I felt a massive surge of protective maternal rage flare hot and bright in my chest. I prepared to step in and physically remove Yvonne's hand from my child. I was ready to tear the room apart. But before I could even move a single muscle, Aaliyah handled it herself. Aaliyah did not cower. She did not cry. She firmly and deliberately yanked her wrist out of Yvonne's harsh grasp. She took a strong, confident step back, aligning herself perfectly with my shoulder. She looked her grandmother dead in the eye with a level of fierce maturity that absolutely took my breath away. "Do not ever touch me," Aaliyah said, her young voice ringing with absolute ringing clarity across the quiet room. "And do not ever call my mother a liar. She is not jealous of you, and she is definitely not jealous of Aunt Jasmine. My mother built an entire empire with her bare hands, while you sat around judging her for smelling like a kitchen. She taught me how to work hard. She taught me how to respect food and our culture, and how to build something real and lasting. You just wanted me to cook for you today, so you could use me as free catering labor and then throw me away the second you got a better, more expensive offer." Yvonne stumbled back a few steps as if Aaliyah had physically slapped her across the face. The shock of being directly confronted and rejected by a teenager completely short-circuited her brain. "I am so proud of my mother," Aaliyah continued, raising her chin high. "I am proud of our culinary heritage. You should be ashamed of yourself for caring more about impressing strangers than loving your own blood." The pride I felt in that exact moment was entirely immeasurable. I had spent my entire life trying to shield my daughter from the generational trauma and toxic expectations of my family. Seeing her stand tall and reject that poison with such fierce grace was the greatest victory I could ever ask for. Yvonne's face contorted into an ugly mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She realized she had lost on every single front. She had lost the financial upper hand, she had lost her golden child's fake billionaire status, and she had just lost the respect of her own granddaughter. Her hands shook violently at her sides as she struggled to maintain her composure. "You are completely dead to me, Kendra," Yvonne screamed, losing all her refined manners as her voice echoed loudly off the soundproof glass walls of the VIP room. "Both of you are dead to me. I will formally disown you for humiliating us like this. You will never set foot in my house again. You are destroying this family. And I will make sure everyone we know hears exactly what kind of vindictive monster you really are. She took a deep, ragged breath, preparing to unleash another tirade of verbal abuse. She wanted to cut me down until there was nothing left, but the harsh words never left her mouth. Right at that exact second, the heavy mahogany front doors of the obsidian room swung wide open. The timing was so perfectly cinematic it felt orchestrated by fate itself. Walking through the main lobby and heading straight toward the host stand were two older white individuals radiating an aura of intense old money privilege. The man wore a sharply tailored gray suit, while the woman was draped in understated designer elegance and a heavy string of authentic pearls. It was Richard and Victoria. Connor's ultra-wealthy parents had just arrived for the birthday celebration. They were smiling brightly, expecting to walk into a lavish, harmonious birthday dinner where they would be treated like absolute royalty by their son's adoring in-laws. They expected a pristine display of wealth and perfect Southern hospitality. They had absolutely no idea they were walking directly into a completely shattered house of cards. The heavy mahogany doors of the restaurant swung open, and all the air seemed to get sucked right out of the room. Richard and Victoria walked through the main dining floor, radiating an aura of intense old money privilege. Richard wore a sharply tailored gray suit that probably cost more than my first car, while Victoria was draped in understated designer elegance and a heavy string of authentic pearls. They walked with the slow, confident pace of people who knew the world would always move out of their way. I watched my mother Yvonne perform the most terrifying psychological pivot I had ever witnessed in my 35 years of life. Less than 2 seconds ago, her face was contorted into an ugly mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Her hands had been shaking with the desire to destroy me. But the absolute second she registered Richard and Victoria walking toward our glass-enclosed VIP room, her entire physical demeanor transformed. The dark, furious shade of purple vanished from her cheeks, replaced instantly by a pristine, glowing smile. She smoothed her cream-colored suit and practically floated toward the entrance of the glass room. Jasmine mirrored her mother's rapid transformation. She wiped the sheer panicked terror from her eyes and plastered on a sickeningly sweet smile. Together, the two women rushed forward to greet the wealthy in-laws. As they moved, they deliberately and aggressively positioned their bodies to create a solid human wall between the door and where Aaliyah and I were standing. They were physically maneuvering to block us from view, desperately trying to hide the working-class black single mother and her teenage daughter from their elite white guests. Richard, Victoria, we are just absolutely thrilled that you are here, Yvonne gushed, throwing her arms open to embrace Victoria in a delicate, fragrant hug. We have been waiting all evening for this special moment. Please come in and sit down. Richard stepped into the glass room, looking around at the soundproof walls and the crystal chandelier overhead. This is quite an impressive setup, Yvonne, he said, his deep voice carrying a note of genuine approval. I know how impossible it is to get a table at the Obsidian Room, let alone the private glass enclosure. My associates on Wall Street have been on the waiting list for months. Yvonne let out a high-pitched musical laugh that sounded like nails on a chalkboard to my ears. Oh, you know our Jasmine? She cooed, reaching out to pat Jasmine's shoulder with aggressive affection. She is the absolute business mastermind of this family. She leveraged her elite corporate connections to secure this room for us tonight. She pulled strings with the upper management just to make sure you two had the perfect private dining experience. Jasmine puffed out her chest, soaking in the stolen praise. She smiled modestly at her wealthy father-in-law. It was nothing, Richard. Jasmine lied smoothly, not even stuttering. I just made a few phone calls to the right people. When you operate at a certain level in the corporate world, doors just tend to open for you. We wanted tonight to be a reflection of our families coming together in true elegance. I stood in the back of the glass room with my arms still wrapped protectively around Aaliyah's shoulders. I felt my daughter tense up, her breath catching in her throat at the absolute audacity of her aunt's lies. Jasmine was standing in a building that I completely owned, taking full credit for my hard work, just to stroke her own fragile ego. I looked over at Connor. He was standing near the table, sweating profusely through his bespoke navy suit. He looked like a man standing on the trapdoor of a gallows, knowing the lever was about to be pulled. He greeted his parents with a shaky, weak voice, terrified that I was going to expose his massive financial ruin right then and there. But I decided to play along for exactly 3 minutes. I was not going to scream or make a scene. That was what they expected me to do. They expected the angry black woman stereotype, and I was not going to give them the satisfaction of dismissing me as emotional or unhinged. I was going to let them dig their own graves, and then I was going to hand them the shovel. I caught the eye of David, my general manager, who was still standing discreetly near the entrance of the VIP room. I gave him a very subtle nod and stepped slightly away from my family to speak to him in a hushed whisper. David, I brought several large plastic containers from my home kitchen. I said, keeping my voice deadly quiet. They are currently resting in the trunk of my car with the valet. I want you to go retrieve them immediately. Take them back to the executive kitchen. Tell the culinary team to throw out whatever standard menu items these people ordered. I want the food in those plastic containers heated properly and plated with absolute 5-star precision. Serve it to this table immediately. David did not ask a single question. He simply nodded respectfully and vanished through the mahogany doors, executing my exact orders with flawless precision. I walked back to Aaliyah and whispered in her ear. Watch closely, baby, I told her. Watch how desperate people behave when they have no real substance of their own. For the next few minutes, Yvonne and Jasmine put on an absolute masterclass in sycophantic behavior. They pulled out chairs for Richard and Victoria, pouring them expensive sparkling water and laughing too loudly at every single minor comment Richard made. They completely ignored me and Aaliyah, acting as if we were nothing more than the hired help standing silently in the corner of the room. Yvonne kept dominating the conversation, steering it constantly toward Jasmine's fabricated corporate success and Connor's supposed brilliant technology startup. Connor just sat there gripping his water glass so tightly his knuckles turned completely white. Then the heavy glass doors slid open again. A team of highly trained servers entered the room, moving with perfect synchronized grace. They carried large, pristine white porcelain plates covered with gleaming silver cloches. They stepped up to the table and placed a plate in front of Richard, Victoria, Connor, Jasmine, and Yvonne. On the count of 3, the servers lifted the silver covers in absolute unison. The incredible savory aroma of slow-braised beef short ribs simmering in a rich bourbon peach glaze instantly filled the enclosed glass room. The scent was incredibly warm and complex, carrying deep notes of smoked hickory and sweet caramelized fruit. Sitting beside the perfectly tender beef were the smoked Gouda and collard green tartlets sitting on a bed of vibrant orange sweet potato puree. The presentation was absolutely breathtaking. My culinary team in the back had taken Aaliyah's homemade food and elevated the visual plating to match the elite standard of the obsidian room. But the soul of the dish, the rich, authentic flavor profile, was entirely my 15-year-old daughter's creation. Richard leaned forward over his plate, his eyes widening in pure surprise. The aroma of this dish is absolutely extraordinary, he murmured, picking up his heavy silver fork. I have dined at Michelin-star restaurants all over the globe, and I have never smelled a flavor profile quite like this. It smells incredibly authentic. He cut a small piece of the braised short rib and placed it into his mouth. The entire table went completely silent as Richard closed his eyes. He chewed slowly, letting the complex layers of the bourbon peach glaze and the perfectly rendered fat of the beef wash over his palate. He let out a low sound of absolute amazement and set his fork down on the pristine white tablecloth. "This is brilliant," Richard announced, opening his eyes and looking around the table with sheer awe. "This is an absolute culinary masterpiece. The balance of the sweet peach against the smoky bourbon is flawless. The meat melts instantly. It perfectly bridges the gap between elevated fine dining and authentic Southern soul. This is not just food. This is an incredible talent." Victoria took a bite of the smoked Gouda tartlet and immediately nodded in enthusiastic agreement. "Richard is right, Yvonne. This is by far the best meal I have had in this city. The chef here is a true visionary." Richard wiped his mouth with his cloth napkin and looked directly at Jasmine. He leaned forward, his business instincts completely taking over the dining experience. Jasmine, you said you curated this entire evening through your elite connections, correct? I need to meet the executive chef who created this specific menu. Right now. A talent like this is incredibly rare in the hospitality industry. I want to invest a massive sum of capital into their future. Whoever designed this flavor profile is going to build an absolute empire, and I want to be on the ground floor of their next venture. Jasmine heard the words, massive sum of capital, and her eyes lit up with pure, unadulterated greed. She completely forgot about the fact that her husband was drowning in debt. She forgot about the tension in the room. She saw a golden opportunity to elevate her status and claim the ultimate victory in front of her wealthy in-laws. Without hesitating for a single second, Jasmine stood up from her velvet chair. She smoothed her silk dress and offered Richard a smug, deeply arrogant smile. "Oh, Richard, you do not need to call the chef out here." Jasmine lied, her voice dripping with toxic, sugary pride. "I actually curated this entire tasting menu myself. I designed the flavor profiles and specifically instructed the kitchen staff on how to execute the bourbon glaze. I wanted tonight to be a perfect reflection of my own personal culinary vision. The talent you are looking to invest in is standing right in front of you." I looked at David, my general manager, who stood perfectly still beside the mahogany wall panel near the entrance. I gave him a single sharp nod. He pressed a button on the small remote control in his hand. The massive presentation screen normally reserved for high-end corporate retreats and exclusive private events descended smoothly from the ceiling at the far end of the glass-enclosed room. Jasmine leaned forward in her velvet chair with a smug, triumphant smile resting on her face. She fully expected the screen to display a live feed of my kitchen staff tampering with her supposedly flawless menu. She was waiting for her grand moment of vindication to prove to her wealthy in-laws that I was nothing more than a vindictive, bitter caterer trying to ruin her perfect night. Instead, the large screen flickered to life, displaying a crystal-clear, high-definition security feed from the front lobby of the Obsidian Room. The timestamp in the lower right corner blinked in stark white numbers. The footage was from exactly 20 minutes ago. I watched the exact moment Connor recognized the footage. The last remaining drops of color vanished completely from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. He lunged forward, his hands slamming violently against the polished dining table, desperate to stop what was about to happen. But it was far too late. I tapped my phone screen, instantly unmuting the audio feed from the lobby camera and syncing it directly to the VIP room's state-of-the-art surround sound system. The crisp digital audio filled the quiet dining space. On the large screen, Connor was pacing frantically back and forth near the coat check podium in the lobby. He was pulling aggressively at his hair, his expensive designer tie noticeably loosened. My mother Yvonne stood right next to him, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, looking around nervously to ensure no one was listening to them. "Yvonne, you have to guarantee me this goes perfectly tonight." Connor's recorded voice echoed through the speakers, laced with raw, unhinged panic. "My startup is hemorrhaging cash right now. We are going to miss payroll next week. If my parents do not write me a check for $500,000 tonight, I am completely finished. I am facing total bankruptcy." "I told you I have it under control," my mother replied on the screen, her voice dripping with calculated annoyance. I texted Kendra and Aaliyah that the plans changed. I told them it was adults only. They are sitting at home right now, completely out of the picture. Connor stopped pacing on the screen and aggressively rubbed his own face. "Good. Thank God. Look, Yvonne, I do not mean to be insensitive, but my parents prefer a certain type of crowd. They are very old money. They expect absolute elite sophistication. Having a working-class black single mother and a teenager hanging around our table does not fit the narrative we need to sell them tonight. We need to look like an affluent, highly successful, perfectly blended family. Kendra just does not fit the aesthetic. She makes us look cheap." I watched my mother on the screen. I watched the woman who gave birth to me process this blatantly prejudiced, incredibly disrespectful statement about her own flesh and blood. She did not slap him. She did not defend me. She did not defend her own 15-year-old granddaughter. Instead, she nodded in absolute agreement. "I know, Connor," Yvonne said on the video, her voice colder than ice. "That is exactly why I had Aaliyah cook all that food this morning. I needed a backup plan just in case this restaurant reservation fell through, but I was never going to bring them here. They would just embarrass us in front of your family. Now pull yourself together before your parents walk through those doors. The video feed cut to black. The presentation screen silently rolled back up into the ceiling, disappearing as if it had never been there. The quiet that descended upon the VIP dining room was absolute. It was a suffocating, heavy silence that pressed down on every single person sitting at the table. The lively ambient noise of the main restaurant outside the glass walls seemed to exist in a completely different universe. Inside this room, the air was thick with the toxic fallout of a devastating revelation. Jasmine sat frozen in her chair, her hands clamped tightly over her mouth. Her breathing was ragged, her chest heaving against her silk dress. She was staring at Connor as if she were looking at a complete stranger. The grand illusion of her billionaire tech husband was entirely dead, replaced by the pathetic reality of a desperate prejudiced fraud begging his parents for a massive financial bailout. Her entire identity, her social climbing, her bragging, her arrogance had been built on a foundation of absolute lies. Yvonne sat perfectly rigid, her eyes glued to the empty space where the screen had just been. She could not bring herself to look at me. She could not look at Aaliyah. Her beautifully styled hair and her expensive cream suit suddenly looked like a cheap costume. The aristocratic mask had been violently ripped from her face, exposing the deeply insecure, disloyal woman hiding underneath. I pulled Aaliyah closer to my side, wrapping my arm firmly around her shoulders. I could feel the intense tension radiating through my daughter's body, but she was standing remarkably tall. She was not crying. The sheer shock of hearing her own grandmother calculating her erasure had burned away any remaining tears. This was not just a minor family disagreement over a ruined birthday meal. This was a calculated, socially motivated, and racially charged betrayal. Yvonne had willingly participated in the complete erasure of her own daughter and granddaughter just to secure a white in-law's financial bailout. She had knowingly allowed Connor to degrade us. She had exploited my teenager's labor, having Aaliyah slave over a hot stove for 12 hours, just to have a free safety net in case her elite dinner plans fell through. She had traded our dignity, our culture, and our presence for proximity to fake wealth and status. I stood there feeling a profound mixture of vindication and deep generational grief. I was a 35-year-old Black woman who had built an incredible business empire from the ground up, yet my own mother still viewed me as an embarrassment to be hidden away in the shadows. But I did not break. I did not raise my voice or shed a single tear. I held my ground knowing that the truth was the absolute sharpest weapon I could ever wield. I shifted my gaze across the table to Richard and Victoria. Connor's wealthy parents had been sitting completely motionless throughout the entire video playback. The heavy silver forks they had been using to eat Aaliyah's masterful short ribs were resting quietly on the pristine white tablecloth. The color had drained from their faces, leaving them pale and rigid with shock. They had walked into this restaurant expecting a harmonious, lavish celebration. They had been treated to a sickeningly sweet performance by Yvonne and Jasmine. They had been lied to about the food they were eating. And now they had just watched video proof of their own son admitting to massive financial ruin while making highly offensive classist remarks about my family. Slowly and methodically, Victoria reached up and removed the linen napkin from her lap. She folded the fabric with deliberate, careful precision and placed it neatly next to her plate. Her expression was completely unreadable, a mask of practiced high society restraint, masking a storm of inner turmoil. Then Richard placed his large hands flat on the mahogany table and pushed his chair back. The heavy scrape of the chair legs against the hardwood floor sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. He stood up to his full height, looming over the table. Victoria stood up right beside him, mirroring his rigid posture. Their faces began to flush a deep, furious shade of red. The veins in Richard's neck were visibly pulsing against his crisp white shirt collar. Connor scrambled out of his chair immediately, his hands raised in a pathetic, panicked gesture of surrender. "Dad, please, you have to let me explain." Connor begged, his voice cracking with absolute desperation. He took a frantic step toward his father, practically tripping over his own feet. The audio was completely taken out of context. My company is just going through a minor transitional phase right now. I just needed a small bridge loan to cover some unexpected overhead costs. I was going to ask you about it during dessert. You know how stressful the tech industry is right now. Richard did not even flinch. He did not look at Connor with an ounce of sympathy or fatherly understanding. The disappointment radiating from him was palpable, heavy enough to crush the air in the room. And when Richard turned his gaze toward me, he did not look at me with the elitist disgust that Connor and Yvonne had anticipated. He did not look at my daughter with judgment. Instead, Richard looked back down at his own son with a level of absolute simmering fury that seemed to shake the very glass walls surrounding us. Richard stood towering over the dining table, his face a mask of absolute freezing contempt. The silence in the room was so heavy it felt like the air had been sucked completely out through the ventilation system. Victoria picked up her designer purse from the empty chair beside her, snapping the golden clasp shut with a sharp, metallic click that echoed loudly off the soundproof glass walls. Connor reached out across the mahogany table, his hands trembling uncontrollably. "Dad, please, you are taking this completely out of context. You have to listen to me." Richard did not even blink. "There is no context that justifies what I just witnessed, Connor," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register that commanded absolute authority. "You sat in my office last week begging for $500,000, claiming your company was on the verge of a massive breakthrough. You looked me in the eye and swore your financial projections were solid. Instead, I find out you are drowning in massive debt, 3 months behind on your commercial rent, and lying to your own family. But the financial incompetence is not even the worst part." Victoria stepped forward, her expression radiating pure aristocratic disgust. "The worst part, Connor, is your absolute lack of basic human integrity." She looked at Jasmine, and then at Yvonne, her eyes sweeping over them like they were dirt on the bottom of her expensive shoes. "You willingly participated in the erasure of your own family members. You degraded a hard-working mother and her child just because you thought it would impress us. You thought we would align with your pathetic prejudice. We do not do business with frauds, and we certainly do not fund bigots." Richard buttoned his suit jacket, adjusting his cuffs with terrifying calm. "We are pulling all financial support immediately, Connor. The seed funding is gone. The emergency bridge loan is canceled. I will be notifying the board of directors in the morning that I am officially withdrawing my backing from your startup. You are completely on your own." Connor let out a strangled, pathetic sound. "Dad, you cannot do this. If you pull the funding, the company is dead in the water. We will have to file for bankruptcy by Friday." "Then you better call a good bankruptcy lawyer," Richard replied coldly. "Victoria, take my arm. We are leaving right now." Without another word, the wealthy couple turned their backs on the shattered table and walked out of the glass room. They did not look back. The heavy mahogany doors of the restaurant closed behind them, sealing Connor's absolute financial ruin. The second the doors closed behind the in-laws, the fragile, polite illusion inside the VIP room violently exploded into absolute unhinged chaos. The civilized masks were ripped off, exposing the ugly, desperate panic underneath. Connor whipped around to face Jasmine, his eyes wide with sheer, frantic hatred. He pointed a shaking finger directly at her face. "This is your fault," he screamed, losing all of his polished composure. "You were supposed to manage this dinner. You promised me your mother had everything under control. You just cost me my entire company because your pathetic family could not keep their mouth shut for 1 single hour." Jasmine shot up from her velvet chair, her silk dress knocking over her water glass. The ice cubes spilled across the pristine white tablecloth, soaking into the fabric. "How is this my fault?" she shrieked, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. "You are the one who ran our finances into the ground. You lied to me for months about how much money we had. You promised me we were rich, Connor. You made me look like an absolute fool in front of my own family. I married a billionaire tech genius, not a broke fraud facing bankruptcy." "You married a wallet, Jasmine," Connor spat back, leaning aggressively over the table. "And now the wallet is completely empty." Yvonne slammed her hands down on the table, desperate to regain control of the crumbling hierarchy she had built her entire life around. "Stop it, both of you," she commanded, but her voice lacked its usual intimidating power. It just sounded frantic and incredibly weak. "We can fix this. Connor, you can call your father tomorrow when he calms down. Jasmine, sit down and stop acting like a spoiled child." Jasmine turned her furious, tear-filled eyes onto her mother. "Stop telling me what to do," she sobbed aggressively. "You ruined this. You are the one who sent that stupid text message. You are the one who tried to hide Kendra. If you had just left the plans alone, none of this would have happened. My marriage is falling apart and it is entirely your fault." Yvonne gasped, placing the hand over her pearl necklace, as if Jasmine had physically struck her across the face. "I did everything for you, Jasmine. I sacrificed everything to put you in this position of power." Then Yvonne did what she always did when her back was pinned against the wall. She looked for a scapegoat. She turned her wild, angry eyes toward me, where I stood quietly with Aaliyah by the door. "Look what you did, Kendra," Yvonne yelled, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "Are you happy now? You aired our dirty laundry in public. You brought your daughter here just to destroy your sister's life out of pure vindictive jealousy. You tore this family apart." I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch. I did not match her frantic, hysterical energy. I just looked at the three of them standing around the soaked table, fighting like rats over the miserable scraps of their ruined reputations. "I did not tear this family apart, Yvonne." I said, my voice perfectly level and grounded. I just turned on the lights so everyone could see the rot that was already there. "You destroyed this family the moment you decided an aesthetic was more important than your own granddaughter." I turned slightly and caught the eye of my general manager, David, who was standing by silently observing the entire chaotic scene. He stepped forward instantly, his posture impeccable. "David," I said, keeping my gaze fixed on Connor, "please process the billing for this table immediately." David nodded and pulled a sleek black leather checkbook from the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket. "Since you all wanted the absolute elite dining experience tonight, I believe it is only fair that you pay for it." I continued, my voice slicing through the remaining tension in the room. "David, please ensure that the bill reflects the full price of the exclusive private tasting menu. Remove all family discounts, all complimentary beverages, and all hospitality comps. Charge them the standard rate for renting the glass-enclosed VIP room on a Saturday night." David walked smoothly over to the table and placed the black leather folder directly in front of Connor. Connor stared down at the leather book as if it were a live explosive. His hands shook as he slowly opened the cover to look at the printed receipt. The color drained from his face for the second time that night. The total at the bottom of the page was staggering. At $500 a plate, plus the premium room reservation fee, the automatic gratuity, and the expensive champagne they had ordered before the meal, the total easily exceeded $3,000. "I do not have this kind of money on me right now," Connor whispered, his voice completely devoid of its former arrogance. "My corporate cards are maxed out. My personal accounts are frozen pending the audit. I cannot pay this, Kendra." Jasmine looked away, refusing to make eye contact with him. Yvonne stared at the ceiling, looking like she was desperately trying to wake up from a terrible nightmare. Neither of the women made a single move to reach for their purses. They expected the men around them to foot the bill, and now there was no one left to save them. "I suggest you figure it out quickly, Connor," I said coldly, "because my security team will not let you leave this building until that balance is settled in full. Maybe you can put it on a payment plan if your credit is not entirely destroyed." Connor looked up at me, his eyes wide and completely defeated. He looked like a man who had lost absolutely everything in the span of 30 minutes. His wealthy parents had cut him off. His wife was looking at him with pure, unadulterated disgust. His company was dead in the water. "Please, Kendra," Connor begged, his voice breaking. He actually clasped his hands together on the edge of the table. "Have some mercy. You have already proved your point. You have the money. You own the building. Just comp the meal. I am begging you. I have absolutely nothing left. If my company goes under tomorrow, I will lose my house. I will lose everything I have ever worked for. I looked at the desperate broken man sitting at the table. I thought about the cruel words he had spoken on the security camera. I thought about him calling me and Aaliyah the wrong type of crowd. I thought about him sneering at diversity loans and acting like my hard-earned success was a cheap handout. He had tried to step on my neck to elevate himself, and now he was begging for my mercy. I stepped closer to the table, resting my hands calmly on the polished mahogany surface. I looked down into his terrified eyes. "I am not comping your meal, Connor," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, deadly whisper. "And your company is not going under tomorrow. It went under 10 minutes ago when your father walked out those doors." I stood up straight, adjusting the strap of my leather handbag on my shoulder. "And since you are no longer receiving that massive $500,000 seed funding investment, I have instructed my property management team to proceed with the legal protocols we drafted earlier this week," I said smoothly. Connor swallowed hard, his throat clicking audibly in the quiet room. "What legal protocols?" "The eviction notice for your commercial office space at Sterling Plaza." I informed him, watching the absolute devastation settle permanently over his features. "My legal team filed the paperwork this afternoon when your rent hit the 90-day delinquent mark. You have officially breached the terms of your commercial lease agreement. The formal eviction notice will be served to you by the County Sheriff's Department at your office doors at exactly 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. I suggest you bring some large cardboard boxes because my security team will be changing the locks on your suite by noon." Connor stared at the black leather checkbook as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. He was completely paralyzed. Jasmine had buried her face in her hands, sobbing with loud, ugly gasps that echoed off the soundproof glass walls of the VIP room. Her entire world of designer handbags and luxury vacations had just evaporated into thin air. The elite tech billionaire she thought she married was nothing more than a desperate man facing absolute ruin and an 8 o'clock morning eviction. But my mother Yvonne was not finished. She had spent 60 years cultivating an impenetrable armor of aristocratic arrogance, and she simply refused to accept that she had lost control of the narrative. Even with the video evidence of her betrayal still fresh in our minds, even with Richard's furious departure confirming their total failure, Yvonne desperately clung to her delusion of authority. She marched around the polished mahogany table, her expensive cream-colored suit practically vibrating with indignation. She stopped directly in front of me, planting her feet firmly on the hardwood floor. She squared her shoulders, lifting her chin to look down her nose at me, just as she had done every single day of my childhood. "You have made your point, Kendra," Yvonne commanded, her voice sharp and ringing with that familiar toxic authority. "You wanted to prove that you have money. Fine, we see it. You humiliated your sister. You embarrassed Connor in front of his parents. Now it is time for you to stop this foolishness and act like an adult. I expect you to fix this mess immediately." I looked at her in genuine disbelief. Aaliyah shifted her weight beside me, her hand gripping the fabric of her green dress as she watched her grandmother attempt to command the very woman she had just tried to erase. "Fix this mess." I repeated, my tone dangerously calm. "Yes," Yvonne snapped, gesturing sharply toward Connor, who was still staring blankly at the staggering restaurant bill. "You will instruct your general manager to waive this ridiculous dinner charge right now. Then you will call off this absurd eviction nonsense at Sterling Plaza. Connor made a mistake, but he is family. Family loyalty means we protect our own when times get tough. I am your mother, and I demand that you show some respect for the family name. We stick together, Kendra. That is how we survive." The sheer, unadulterated hypocrisy of her words was breathtaking. She was standing in a restaurant she had specifically banned me from attending, demanding that I demonstrate the exact same family loyalty she had aggressively denied me just hours earlier. She had willingly conspired to hide my existence because I was a working-class black single mother who did not fit her elite aesthetic. Now that she realized I held the keys to the kingdom, she suddenly wanted to preach about the sacred bond of blood. "You do not know the first thing about family loyalty, Yvonne," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "You do not get to demand respect from the daughter you just tried to throw away like garbage. You stood in that lobby and agreed to erase my child just to secure a white in-law's financial bailout. You sold your own flesh and blood for a chance at a $500,000 check. Do not ever speak to me about protecting our own." Yvonne slammed her hand against the back of a velvet dining chair. Her perfectly styled hair trembled with her rage. "I am your mother," she screamed, abandoning her refined manners completely. "I brought you into this world. I put a roof over your head for 18 years. You owe me everything you have. You think because you bought a few buildings you are suddenly better than us. You think you can just stand there and judge me. I am the matriarch of this family, and I am telling you to cancel Connor's eviction right now." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked at the furious, desperate woman screaming in front of me, and I prepared to deliver the absolute final killing blow. I had kept this secret for 36 long months, swallowing my pride while she paraded around Atlanta acting like she was better than me. Now it was time to tear down the very last pillar of her fake high society existence. I crossed my arms over my chest and tilted my head, studying her flushed, angry face. "Speaking of putting a roof over people's heads, Yvonne, let us talk about your house," I said smoothly. "Let us talk about that beautiful 5-bedroom brick estate you live in over in the Buckhead district, the one with the manicured lawns and the country club aesthetic, the one you love to host your fancy garden parties in so you can brag to your wealthy friends about your fabulous lifestyle." Yvonne's eyes darted back and forth nervously. Her screaming abruptly stopped. She clearly did not understand why I was suddenly bringing up her real estate. "My house has absolutely nothing to do with this conversation," she stammered, crossing her arms defensively. "My home is fully secured." "Is it?" I asked, raising a single eyebrow. "Because 3 years ago your late husband's outstanding business debts finally caught up with you. You completely drained your savings trying to keep up appearances. You maxed out your credit cards buying designer clothes so you could pretend you were still rich. And then you fell 6 months behind on your mortgage payments." Jasmine stopped sobbing and looked up, her tear-streaked face, a picture of pure confusion. She looked at her mother and then at me. "Mom, what is she talking about?" Jasmine asked, her voice raspy. "You told me the house was paid off." Yvonne's face turned a ghastly shade of pale white. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The defensive, aggressive posture she had been holding completely evaporated. She was facing total foreclosure. I continued speaking directly to Jasmine, but keeping my eyes locked onto my mother. The bank was exactly 1 week away from putting a lockbox on her front door and throwing all her expensive furniture out onto the street. But then, by some absolute miracle, an anonymous benefactor stepped in. A private trust started making direct monthly deposits into her bank account. $3,850 on the first of every single month without fail. Yvonne began to shake. Her hands gripped the velvet chair so tightly, her knuckles turned white. For 3 years, Yvonne has been bragging to her elite social circle about her brilliant investments. I said, my voice echoing coldly in the glass room. She even implied to a few aunts and uncles that Jasmine and Connor were the ones secretly funding her lifestyle because they were just so incredibly wealthy and generous. She loved letting people believe that her golden child was keeping her in luxury. I took a slow, deliberate step toward my mother, closing the distance between us until I was standing barely 2 feet away from her terrified face. "But Jasmine and Connor never gave you a single dime, did they, Yvonne?" I whispered, the truth hitting the air like a physical strike. "Connor was too busy running his own company into the ground to care about your mortgage. You have been surviving on the charity of a ghost." I reached into my handbag and pulled out my phone for the final time that night. I opened my secure banking portal and navigated to the automated transfer section. I turned the screen toward her so she could clearly see the active recurring payment schedule set up under my private limited liability company. "It was me, Mom," I said, dropping the final devastating bomb. "I am the anonymous benefactor, the daughter you called a failure, the daughter you banned from your birthday dinner because I embarrassed you, the catering girl who smelled like a kitchen. I have been paying your mortgage every single month for 3 years just to keep a roof over your head because despite your cruelty, I still believe that family took care of each other." Yvonne let out a sharp, agonizing gasp. The sheer magnitude of the revelation hit her with the force of an earthquake. The daughter she had spent her entire life discarding, mocking, and erasing was the only reason she was not living in a cheap motel. Her entire aristocratic identity, her pristine Buckhead estate, her country club status. It was all entirely funded by my hard work. I was the architect of her survival. I tapped the red icon on my phone screen. A confirmation dialog box popped up asking if I wanted to terminate the recurring monthly transfer. You wanted me to show some respect for the family name Yvonne. I said, my voice devoid of any lingering emotion. You wanted me to understand how we survive. I understand it perfectly now. You survive by bleeding me dry and then hiding me in the shadows. I pressed my finger firmly against the glass screen, hitting the confirm button. Those transfers are officially canceled as of tonight. I informed her, watching the digital notification confirm the termination. The next payment is due next Tuesday. It will not be arriving. You are completely cut off. The physical reaction was instantaneous. Yvonne's knees practically buckled beneath her. She sagged heavily against the velvet dining chair, letting out a low, guttural sob of absolute despair. The arrogant, demanding matriarch was completely gone, replaced by a broken, terrified woman who had just realized she had systematically destroyed the only real lifeline she had ever had. She had sacrificed my love for proximity to fake wealth, and now she was left with absolutely nothing. Connor was staring blankly at the wall, completely unresponsive to the chaos around him. Jasmine was weeping uncontrollably, mourning the death of her socialite identity. I did not stay to watch them burn in the ashes of their own arrogance. I had delivered the absolute final truth, and I was entirely finished. I turned my back on the screaming, sobbing table. I looked at Aaliyah, who was watching me with eyes full of deep, profound respect. She had witnessed the ultimate dismantling of the toxic generational cycle that had plagued our family for decades. I reached out and took my daughter's hand. Her fingers were warm and steady, holding tightly onto mine. "Let us go home, baby," I said softly. We walked together out of the glass-enclosed VIP room, leaving the heavy mahogany door wide open behind us. I did not look back at my mother. I did not look back at my sister. I walked straight through the luxurious, crowded dining room of the Obsidian Room, knowing that every single brick, every single crystal chandelier, and every single plate of food in the building belonged to me. We stepped out through the heavy brass doors of the Obsidian Room, and the warm, humid air of the Atlanta night immediately wrapped around us. The chaotic, suffocating energy of the glass-enclosed VIP room vanished the second the front doors sealed shut behind our backs. The city street was loud with the sounds of traffic and distant sirens, but to me it sounded like absolute pure silence. I handed my ticket to the valet attendant. He recognized me instantly and jogged to retrieve my car. I stood on the pristine sidewalk with my arms still resting securely around Aaliyah's shoulders. Neither of us spoke. We just stood there under the glow of the streetlights, taking deep, cleansing breaths. The sharp, stinging adrenaline that had fueled me through the confrontation was slowly beginning to recede, leaving behind a profound and heavy physical exhaustion. But it was a good kind of exhaustion. It was the feeling you get after carrying a massive boulder up a steep hill and finally letting it drop to the dirt. The valet pulled my sleek black SUV up to the curb. I handed him a generous cash tip, thanked him, and opened the passenger door for my daughter. Aaliyah slid into the soft leather seat, arranging her emerald green dress around her knees. I walked around to the driver's side and climbed in, pulling the heavy door shut. The interior of the car felt like a fortified sanctuary. The thick, insulated windows blocked out the noise of the city, leaving us in a quiet, protected bubble. I did not immediately start the engine. I just sat behind the steering wheel, gripping the smooth leather and staring out through the windshield at the glowing neon signs of the downtown buildings. Beside me, Aaliyah let out a long, trembling exhale. The sheer magnitude of what had just happened was finally settling into her 15-year-old mind. She had just watched the complete, systematic dismantling of her grandmother's entire high society life. She had watched her wealthy, untouchable aunt and uncle be exposed as desperate frauds. She had seen the ugly, racist reality behind their sudden change of dinner plans. And most importantly, she had watched her own mother hold the absolute ultimate power over all of them. I turned my head and looked at her. Her dark eyes were wide and searching, scanning my face for any sign of regret or sorrow. She was waiting for me to break down. She was waiting for the emotional fallout that usually followed family arguments. She expected me to launch into a long dramatic speech about how much it hurt to realize my own mother did not love me enough to claim me in front of strangers. But I did not give a dramatic speech. I did not shed a single tear. The deep, agonizing well of grief that I used to carry around regarding my mother's approval had completely dried up. There was nothing left to mourn because the mother I had been mourning never actually existed. She was just an illusion I had projected onto a woman who only cared about status. I reached out and gently tucked a stray braid behind Aaliyah's ear. I pushed the ignition button and the car engine roared to life with a low, steady hum. I reached over to the digital dashboard console and tapped the media screen. I scrolled through our saved music libraries and selected Aaliyah's favorite rhythm and blues playlist. The smooth, soulful voice of a familiar singer filled the cabin, wrapping around us like a warm blanket. I put the car in drive and pulled smoothly away from the curb, leaving the obsidian room and the wreckage of my toxic family far behind us in the rearview mirror. We drove in comfortable, companionable silence for several blocks. The streetlights washed over the interior of the car in steady, rhythmic flashes of yellow and orange. I could feel the last lingering knots of tension completely melting out of my neck and shoulders. So I said, keeping my eyes focused on the road ahead, "What do you want to cook tomorrow, baby?" Aaliyah turned her head to look at me. A slow, beautiful, genuine smile spread across her face. The heavy burden of the evening's betrayal vanished from her expression, replaced by the bright, passionate spark that always appeared when we talked about food. "I was thinking we could try making those honey butter glazed biscuits you were talking about last week," Aaliyah said, her voice gaining strength and enthusiasm. "And maybe we could pair them with a spicy buttermilk fried chicken. I have an idea for a new seasoning blend I want to test out." "That sounds absolutely perfect," I replied, returning her smile. "We can stop by the farmer's market in the morning and pick up whatever you need. You are the executive chef tomorrow. I am just your sous chef." Aaliyah laughed, a bright, clear sound that completely shattered whatever remaining shadows hovered in the car. It was the sound of a young woman who knew exactly who she was and exactly how much she was worth. As I drove us toward the quiet safety of our home, I reflected internally on the massive, monumental shift in my own perspective. For the last 12 years, I had been carrying a suffocating, invisible weight right in the center of my chest. Ever since I started my culinary business, I had secretly harbored a desperate, burning desire to make my mother proud. I wanted her to look at my success and finally admit that I was just as valuable, just as worthy of love as my sister Jasmine. I had paid her mortgage for 3 years under the guise of an anonymous trust, not just out of familial obligation, but out of a deep, tragic hope that somehow my financial sacrifice would magically earn her maternal validation. I had spent my entire adult life trying to prove that I was good enough to sit at her table. But tonight, standing in that glass-enclosed VIP room, I realized the absolute brilliant truth. I did not need a seat at her table because I owned the entire restaurant. I owned the building. I owned the very ground she was standing on. The desperate, gnawing need for Yvonne's validation had completely evaporated from my soul. It was gone, obliterated by the harsh, undeniable reality of her own prejudice. She did not reject me because I was a failure. She rejected me because my success did not look like the white, adjacent, old money fantasy she worshipped. My success smelled like a working kitchen. It looked like long hours and calloused hands. It was deeply rooted in Black Southern culture and authentic community building. She was ashamed of the very thing that made me incredibly powerful. I realized that by trying to protect her by keeping her out of foreclosure and hiding my wealth, I had actually been enabling her delusions. I had been funding the very weapon she used to beat me down. But not anymore. By cutting the final string, I had not just evicted Connor or foreclosed on my mother. I had formally evicted their toxic expectations from my mind. I was completely, utterly free. We were stopped at a red light about 2 miles from our house when the center console screen of the car suddenly lit up. The music volume automatically lowered as a loud, persistent ringing filled the cabin. I glanced down at this glowing display. The caller ID flashed in bright, harsh letters. It was Jasmine. Below her name, a small notification bubble indicated that there were 15 missed calls from her number and another 15 missed calls from Yvonne. 30 missed calls in the span of 20 minutes. They were panicking. They were currently trapped inside the Obsidian room with a $3,000 dinner bill they could not pay. Connor was likely hyperventilating in a corner, realizing he had to face a massive corporate eviction in the morning. Jasmine was probably crying her eyes out, watching her fake billionaire lifestyle circle the drain. And Yvonne was undoubtedly having a full-scale breakdown as the reality of losing her precious Buckhead estate finally set in. They were desperately, frantically trying to reach the one person they had just spent the entire day trying to erase. They wanted me to turn the car around, come back to the restaurant, and save them from the exact consequences they had intentionally brought upon themselves. Aaliyah looked down at the ringing screen and then looked up at me. She did not say a word, but the question was clear in her eyes. What are we going to do? I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I did not feel the familiar tug of family obligation telling me to answer the phone and clean up their mess. I simply reached forward and pressed the power button on the center console. The screen went completely dark, instantly cutting off the ringing and returning the car to the smooth, soothing sounds of Aaliyah's rhythm and blues playlist. I reached into my handbag, pulled out my personal cell phone, and powered that device completely off as well. I dropped the silenced phone into the cup holder. The traffic light turned green. I pressed my foot down on the accelerator and drove smoothly into the warm, welcoming night, heading straight toward the beautiful, peaceful life I had built for my daughter and myself. The sunlight streamed through the large bay windows of our kitchen, casting a warm, golden glow across the white marble countertops. It was a little past 9 in the morning, and the house was filled with the rich, comforting aroma of buttermilk frying oil and melting honey butter. Aaliyah was standing by the stove, humming softly to a classic rhythm and blues track playing from the portable speaker on the island. She was wearing her favorite oversized yellow sweatshirt, her hair pulled up into a messy bun, looking like a completely normal, relaxed teenager. She expertly flipped a piece of seasoned chicken in the cast-iron skillet, the sizzling sound blending perfectly with the music. I sat on a woven bar stool at the kitchen island, sipping a hot cup of black coffee. I watched my daughter move and realized the heavy, suffocating weight that had pressed down on my chest for the last 12 years was completely gone. I took a deep breath and the air actually felt cleaner. For my entire adult life, I had woken up with a low-grade hum of anxiety, wondering what passive-aggressive comment my mother would make that day, or what new impossible standard I would fail to meet. I spent years twisting myself into knots, trying to earn a fraction of the respect she freely handed to my sister Jasmine. But this morning there was no anxiety. There was no desperate need for validation. There was only the pure, unbroken peace of knowing that my daughter and I were safe, happy, and entirely self-sufficient. We laughed loudly as Aaliyah nearly dropped a biscuit onto the floor, catching it just in time with a pair of silver tongs. We were existing in our own beautiful, authentic world, and nobody could touch us. The toxic generational cycle that had poisoned our family tree had been severed cleanly at the root. The tranquil atmosphere was violently shattered by the harsh, frantic ringing of our front doorbell. The sound buzzed aggressively through the hallway, followed immediately by the heavy, desperate sound of someone pounding their fist against the solid wood. Aaliyah froze, her silver tongs hovering over the skillet. The music suddenly seemed too quiet. The joyful energy in the kitchen evaporated for a fraction of a second, replaced by a tense, familiar dread. I looked at Aaliyah and gave her a calm, reassuring nod. I stood up from the bar stool, setting my coffee mug down on the marble counter. I did not rush. I walked slowly and deliberately through the living room toward the front entrance. I knew exactly who was standing on the other side of that door. I could feel the desperate, chaotic energy radiating through the wood before I even touched the handle. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy door open. My mother Yvonne stood on my front porch. She looked absolutely unrecognizable. The polished, arrogant high society matriarch, who had sat in the VIP room of the Obsidian Room less than 12 hours ago, was completely gone. In her place stood a frantic, disheveled woman who looked like she had aged 10 years overnight. Her normally immaculate hair was flat and unkempt, flattened on one side, as if she had spent the night tossing and turning in pure terror. She was wearing a wrinkled beige trench coat over a pair of basic sweatpants, a far cry from the tailored cream suit and heavy pearl necklace she had paraded around in yesterday. Her eyes were bloodshot and swollen, surrounded by dark, heavy circles that proved she had not slept a single minute since I walked out of that restaurant. "Kendra, please," Yvonne gasped the second the door opened, her voice cracking with raw panic. "Thank God you are here. I have been calling you all night long. I drove by the restaurant, but security would not let me inside. Why is your phone turned off? You have to let me inside so we can talk about this." I did not step aside. I planted my feet firmly on the threshold, physically blocking her from crossing into the peaceful sanctuary of my home. My posture was rigid and unyielding. I looked at the frantic woman on my porch and felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no guilt, no lingering childhood desire to comfort her. The emotional detachment I felt was profound and absolute. I made a terrible mistake. Yvonne sobbed, reaching out to grab the frame of the door. Her hands were shaking violently, her manicured nails gripping the painted wood. "I was just so blinded by the pressure, Kendra. You know how Richard and Victoria are. They expect a certain level of perfection, and Connor was begging me to make the dinner go smoothly so he could secure his investment. I was just trying to help my son-in-law save his business. I panicked when they said they wanted an intimate adult dinner. I never meant to hurt you or Aaliyah. You have to believe me. I was just trying to manage a highly stressful situation." I stared at her, listening to the pathetic, empty excuses tumble out of her mouth. Even now, standing on my porch, looking like a shattered shell of a human being, she was still trying to rewrite the narrative. She was still trying to minimize the fact that she had looked at my teenage daughter and decided she was not good enough to sit at a table with wealthy white people. She was calling it a mistake born of pressure when we both knew it was a calculated, socially motivated choice. She was attempting to gaslight me right on my own front porch. "You cannot do this to me, Kendra," Yvonne begged, tears spilling over her eyelashes and running down her cheeks. "You cannot just cut off the mortgage payments. You know I do not have the income to cover that massive house. If you stop those transfers, the bank is going to take my home. I will have absolutely nowhere to go. Jasmine and Connor are facing total bankruptcy. He is literally packing his office into cardboard boxes right now. They cannot help me. I have no one else to turn to." Her voice rose to a pathetic, desperate whine. She reached out, trying to grab my hand, but I smoothly pulled my arm back, keeping a strict physical boundary between us. "You are my daughter," Yvonne cried, her voice echoing loudly in the quiet suburban neighborhood. "Family sticks together through hard times. We are supposed to protect each other. Please, baby, I am begging you. Just reinstate the monthly transfers, and we can put all of this ugly business behind us. We can pretend last night never happened. I will make sure Jasmine apologizes. I will make sure Connor treats you with respect. Just do not let the bank take my home. We can be a real family again." The sheer audacity of her demands was breathtaking. She was standing on my porch, begging for my money, while simultaneously demanding that I adhere to a twisted version of family loyalty that she had never once extended to me. She was perfectly willing to throw me to the wolves when it benefited her social climbing, but the absolute second her own survival was on the line, she wanted to preach about the sacred bond of blood. She expected me to fold because I had always folded in the past. She expected the working-class daughter she had continuously mocked to happily return to her role as the silent, invisible provider. I looked at her tear-stained face and took a slow, deep breath. I did not yell. I did not scream at her or argue with her fabricated excuses. I did not waste my breath trying to make her understand the depth of the racial and social betrayal she had committed against her own granddaughter. She was fundamentally incapable of seeing beyond her own selfish needs. I simply reached into the pocket of my cardigan. I pulled out a single neatly folded piece of paper that I had printed out from my home office computer earlier that morning while Aaliyah was prepping the chicken. I held the paper up right in front of Yvonne's desperate, panicked eyes, holding it perfectly still so she could read exactly what was written on the page. I held the single piece of crisp white printer paper perfectly steady in the cool morning air, keeping it right at eye level for the frantic woman standing on my porch. The black ink on the page was stark and undeniable. It was a blown-up high-resolution screenshot of the exact group text message she had sent to the entire family the previous afternoon. I wanted her to look at her own cruelty. I wanted her to read the exact words she had typed when she thought she held all the power in the world. Change of plans. We are eating at the Obsidian Room instead. Adults only. Aaliyah's food is too heavy for Connor's parents anyway. Yvonne's bloodshot eyes scanned the printed words and a fresh wave of humiliated tears spilled down her cheeks. Her mouth trembled as she looked from the paper back up to my face. She shook her head side to side, trying to find some pathetic excuse to explain away the undeniable proof of her betrayal. She opened her mouth to speak, to offer another hollow apology about being under pressure, but I did not give her the chance to say a single word. I lowered the piece of paper and reached behind me with my free hand. Resting on the entryway console table just inside my front door was a thick, heavy manila folder. I had spent an hour last night compiling its contents specifically for this exact moment. I picked up the folder and held it out toward her. Yvonne stared at the manila envelope as if it were a loaded weapon. Her hands were shaking so violently that she could barely lift her arms, but she slowly reached out and took the folder from my grasp. She fumbled with the metal clasp, her manicured fingernails scraping awkwardly against the thick paper. When she finally opened the flap and looked at the documents inside, the remaining color in her face completely drained away. The first stack of papers consisted of original bank notices and formal foreclosure warnings. They were the exact documents she had desperately tried to hide from her elite social circle 3 years ago. The bold red lettering from the mortgage lender clearly stated that her pristine Buckhead estate was marked for immediate public auction due to severe and prolonged non-payment. "You spent years acting like you were royalty, Yvonne," I said, my voice perfectly flat and devoid of any sympathy. "You paraded around your country club and hosted your lavish garden parties while secretly drowning in massive debt. You let Jasmine and Connor pretend they were your wealthy benefactors just to keep up your high society illusion. But looking at those bank statements, you can finally admit the truth. You were entirely broke, and you were completely dependent on the daughter you loved to call a failure." Yvonne flipped frantically through the foreclosure notices, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. Her eyes darted across the pages, absorbing the stark reality of her own financial incompetence. She had built her entire identity on being superior to me, and now she was holding the legal proof that she was nothing without my silent charity. But I was not finished. I watched her trembling fingers move to the second stack of papers inside the folder. That second stack contained the official certified eviction notice for Connor's technology startup. The document bore the official blue seal of the county sheriff's department and the bold letterhead of my commercial property management group. It clearly outlined that Connor was in extreme breach of his commercial lease agreement at Sterling Plaza and was being formally evicted for 90 days of unpaid rent. "Read the timestamp on the second page, Yvonne," I commanded, keeping my posture completely rigid. She shuffled the papers, her eyes scanning the legal text, until she found the bolded section at the bottom. She let out a sharp, agonizing gasp. "8 o'clock this morning," I told her, checking my wristwatch with calm precision. "The sheriff's deputies have already arrived at his suite. They are currently escorting your brilliant billionaire son-in-law out of his office building and placing padlocks on the doors. His fake corporate empire is officially dead. Richard and Victoria pulled their seed funding last night, and now his physical office is gone. Jasmine is married to a broke, unemployed fraud who cannot even pay his own rent." Yvonne's knees buckled slightly, and she had to lean heavily against the brick pillar of my front porch just to stay standing. The folder slipped from her grasp, and the heavy legal documents scattered across the concrete floor. The foreclosure notices and the eviction papers blew gently in the morning breeze, coming to rest against her dirty sneakers. Her entire, carefully curated universe was burning to the ground right in front of her eyes, and she was completely powerless to stop the flames. "This cannot be happening," Yvonne sobbed, gripping the brick pillar for support. "You cannot do this to us, Kendra. You are acting out of pure vindictiveness. You are trying to destroy this family just to punish me for a simple mistake. We can fix this inside. Let me come inside and talk to Aaliyah. I can explain everything to her. I can make her understand that family has to forgive each other." Suddenly, a new wave of arrogant entitlement washed over her panicked face. She actually believed that because she was my mother, she still had the inherent right to enter my home and manipulate my child. She let go of the brick pillar and lunged forward, attempting to physically push past me through the open doorway. She tried to wedge her shoulder into the gap, demanding access to my sanctuary. I did not retreat a single inch. I planted my feet firmly on the hardwood floor of my entryway and squared my shoulders, transforming my body into an absolute immovable wall. When her shoulder hit my chest, she bounced off me as if she had hit a solid block of concrete. I raised my hand and placed it firmly flat against her chest, physically shoving her back out onto the porch. "Do not ever try to force your way into my house," I said, my voice dropping to a low, terrifying register that made her freeze completely in her tracks. "You have absolutely no authority here. You do not get to walk into my safe space and demand an audience with the granddaughter you just tried to erase. You do not get to speak to Aaliyah ever again." Yvonne stumbled back, her eyes wide with shock at my physical resistance. She looked at me and finally realized that the obedient, desperate daughter she used to control was entirely dead. In her place stood a fiercely protective woman who would burn the world down to keep her child safe. "Kendra, please," Yvonne cried, dropping her aggressive posture and reverting back to pure, desperate begging. "I am your mother. I have nothing left. The bank is going to take my home. Jasmine is threatening to divorce Connor and move back into my house, but I will not even have a house to give her. My friends are going to find out I am broke. My entire life is completely over. I will do anything you want. I will apologize publicly. I will tell everyone that you own the obsidian room. I will give you all the credit. Just give me one more chance. Please give me just one more chance to be a real family." She clasped her hands together in front of her chest, tears streaming freely down her ruined face. She was offering me exactly what I had wanted for 35 years. She was offering me public validation, maternal recognition, and the promise of a real family. A decade ago, I would have given absolutely anything to hear those words fall from her lips. I would have drained my bank accounts and sacrificed my own happiness just to secure that exact promise. But standing there on my porch, looking at her pathetic begging form, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, profound clarity. Her offer meant nothing because it was not born of love. It was born of sheer financial terror. She did not love me. She loved my money. She loved the safety net I provided. And I was completely done financing my own disrespect. I reached forward and grabbed the heavy brass handle of my solid oak front door. I looked Yvonne directly in her weeping, desperate eyes, making sure she saw the absolute finality written across my face. "You changed the plans, Mom," I said, delivering the quiet, devastating truth that would permanently sever our relationship. I just made them permanent. Before she could utter another pathetic plea or shed another manipulative tear, I swung the heavy, solid oak door forward. I closed it directly in her face, shutting out her sobbing figure completely. The thick wood met the door frame with a loud, satisfying thud that echoed through the quiet entryway of my home. I reached up and firmly turned the heavy metal deadbolt, locking it into place with a sharp, definitive click. Instantly, the muffled sound of Yvonne's fists pounding against the exterior of the door began. She hit the wood with frantic, desperate strikes, her muted voice crying out my name from the other side of the barrier. "Kendra, open the door. Please, Kendra." I did not linger in the entryway. I did not look through the peephole to watch her breakdown. I simply turned my back on the front door and began walking slowly down the hallway. With every single step I took, the sound of her pounding fists grew fainter and fainter until it was nothing more than a distant, irrelevant noise. As I walked back into the sunlit kitchen, the warm, comforting smell of frying chicken and sweet honey butter enveloped me. Aaliyah was standing by the stove, swaying her hips to the rhythm and blues track playing from the portable speaker. She looked over her shoulder as I entered the room, offering me a bright, beautiful smile that filled the entire space with genuine joy. I smiled back, walking over to the marble island and picking up my hot cup of coffee. The toxic past was locked outside, and my beautiful future was standing right in front of me. The passage of time is a brilliant equalizer. When you finally stop pouring your entire life force into a black hole of toxic family expectations, you are left with an incredible abundance of time and resources to build your own reality. 6 months passed since the crisp morning I locked my heavy oak door and shut my mother completely out of my universe. 6 months of absolute unbroken peace. I did not bother changing my phone number, but I permanently blocked Yvonne, Jasmine, and Connor across every single communication platform. I let the vast, empty silence do all the talking. I did not need to actively seek out updates on their impending destruction, because in Atlanta, high society gossip travels much faster than a wildfire. When people who have built their entire identities on arrogance and fake wealth finally hit the pavement, the resulting crash echoes across the entire city. The dismantling of Connor's fabricated technology empire happened with brutal, breathtaking speed. My property management team executed his commercial eviction exactly as I had promised in the restaurant. At precisely 8 o'clock the very next morning, 2 armed deputies from the county sheriff's department walked into the sleek glass lobby of Sterling Plaza. They rode the private executive elevator straight up to his floor and formally served him the heavy stack of legal paperwork right in front of his remaining skeleton crew of confused employees. Connor was forced to pack his desk into a cheap brown cardboard box and was escorted out of my building by armed guards, while my maintenance staff changed the heavy brass locks on his suite. I was told he cried uncontrollably in the parking garage. Without a physical office, without daily operations, and most importantly, without the massive $500,000 seed investment he had desperately banked on his company, went into immediate, unrecoverable freefall. Richard and Victoria proved to be people of their absolute word. They were ruthless in their financial severance. They did not just pull their current funding, they completely legally insulated their personal wealth from his failing corporate assets. They cut their son off, leaving him to face the angry creditors and the aggressive collection agencies entirely on his own. Less than 2 weeks after the disastrous birthday dinner at the Obsidian Room, Connor was forced to file for total corporate and personal bankruptcy. His bank accounts were frozen by the state. His assets were seized by the courts. The brilliant, arrogant tech innovator was legally recognized as completely and utterly broke. The financial ruin immediately triggered the absolute collapse of his marriage. Jasmine had spent her entire adult life wearing her husband's perceived wealth like a shiny suit of armor, using it to terrorize and belittle anyone she deemed beneath her. She had built a pristine, untouchable social media presence based heavily on luxury vacations, designer handbags, and expensive imported cars. The absolute second the money evaporated, her fierce family loyalty vanished right alongside it. The repossession agents came for her luxury SUV in the middle of the night, hooking it up to a heavy tow truck and dragging it out of their upscale suburban driveway. It was the exact same vehicle that my mother had secretly funded using the $20,000 repayment I had given her a decade ago. Watching that stolen symbol of status get repossessed by the bank was the ultimate form of poetic justice. Jasmine did not stay to support her husband through his darkest hour. She packed whatever designer clothes she could fit into her expensive luggage and walked out the door without looking back. She filed for a highly contested, bitter divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and intense financial deception. But there was absolutely no money left for her to take in a divorce settlement. She found herself standing in the miserable wreckage of a marriage she had entered purely for status, realizing she had absolutely zero tangible skills or independent wealth of her own to fall back on. She was 32 years old, completely broke, and carrying a reputation for being a vicious, deceitful social climber. The wealthy elite circles she had desperately clung to dropped her the second her premium credit card started declining. But the most devastating fall from grace belonged entirely to my mother. Yvonne had spent 60 years cultivating a flawless aristocratic facade, relying heavily on the illusion of old money and untouchable Southern elegance. She had sacrificed her own flesh and blood just to maintain her precarious position in the Buckhead social hierarchy. When I officially terminated the anonymous monthly trust transfers that had been keeping her mortgage afloat, her pristine world violently imploded. Without my $3,850 arriving on the first of every single month, Yvonne was completely defenseless against the aggressive banking executives she had been dodging for years. The foreclosure process, which I had kept frozen through my silent charity, was immediately legally reactivated. The bank did not offer her any extensions or sympathetic grace periods. They moved with the cold, calculating efficiency of a financial institution reclaiming its massive debt. 30 days after I canceled the transfers, a bright neon orange public auction notice was officially stapled to the front door of her massive brick estate. A heavy metal lockbox was placed over her brass doorknob, locking her out of the life she thought she deserved. Yvonne tried desperately to save face. She tried to quietly secure personal loans from her wealthy country club friends, feeding them elaborate fabricated stories about temporary liquidity issues and massive banking errors. But the elite circles of Atlanta are incredibly small and incredibly vicious. The loud rumors of her impending foreclosure spread through the country club locker rooms and garden parties like a highly contagious virus. The same women she had gossiped with, the same women she had tried to impress by erasing my daughter, simply smiled politely and turned their backs on her. In the cold, shallow world of fake high society, poverty is treated as the ultimate unforgivable sin. The moment they smelled her financial desperation, they cast her out. Her exclusive country club membership was quietly revoked due to severe non-payment. Unable to afford her lavish lifestyle and stripped of her massive house, Yvonne was forced to aggressively downsize. She had to sell off her expensive antique furniture, her designer coats, and her collection of heavy pearl necklaces just to cover her basic moving expenses. The grand matriarch, who had loudly demanded VIP glass dining rooms and scoffed at the scent of a working kitchen, was forced to sign a strict lease on a tiny, basic one-bedroom apartment located in a highly congested working-class neighborhood on the far, dusty outskirts of the city. There were no manicured lawns, there were no private security gates or valet stands. There was just the loud rumble of highway traffic and the crushing, agonizing reality of her new, permanent existence. Her high society days were entirely and completely over. She was exactly where she had always been absolutely terrified of being. She was alone, she was broke, and she was completely irrelevant. I did not feel a single drop of pity for any of them. I did not lose a single second of sleep worrying about the uncomfortable cheap bed my mother was forced to lie in. They had forged their own heavy chains with their arrogance, their prejudice, and their absolute lack of basic human decency. They were suffocating in the dark ruins of their own manufactured illusions. I simply let them choke on the dust while I breathed the fresh air of freedom. While they were busy fighting over the miserable, pathetic scraps of their destroyed reputations, I was busy building a brand new empire. I channeled every single ounce of my energy, my vast financial resources, and my deep culinary passion directly into the one person who actually deserved it. The bright, warm afternoon sun beat down on the bustling pavement of the newly revitalized Arts District in downtown Atlanta. The wide streets were vibrant, filled with the energetic, pulsing rhythm of a thriving, highly supportive community. I stood on the smooth concrete sidewalk, feeling the warm breeze brush against my face. I was wearing a sharply tailored crimson business suit, holding a chilled cup of sweet iced tea in my hand. Standing right beside me was Aaliyah. She was no longer the heartbroken teenager crying in our kitchen over a ruined batch of short ribs. She stood tall, her posture radiating an incredible, undeniable, fierce confidence. She wore a pristine white double-breasted chef's coat meticulously tailored to her frame. The fabric was crisp, bright, and absolutely flawless. We both tilted our heads back, shielding our eyes from the bright glare of the sun, as we looked up at the stunning architecture of the massive newly renovated commercial building standing directly in front of us. The exterior featured sleek, floor-to-ceiling glass windows, exposing a breathtaking state-of-the-art culinary workspace, and an expansive, elegantly designed dining room. The velvet ropes were gone. The exclusionary glass boxes were gone. This place was built entirely on warmth, rich culture, and authentic welcoming power. A specialized crew of construction workers had just finished securing the massive, heavy brass letters onto the dark polished marble marquee, positioned directly over the main entrance. The gleaming metal caught the bright afternoon sunlight, shining with a brilliant golden intensity that commanded absolute respect. I looked at the beautifully crafted sign, and then looked down at my brilliant, talented daughter. The name shining brightly on the marquee was not mine. It was hers. The heavy brass letters spelled out Aaliyah's in a bold, elegant script that caught the late afternoon sun. Below her name, the words Southern Fusion Kitchen were etched into the polished dark marble. I watched my daughter stare up at the marquee, her eyes reflecting the golden light of the busy street. She reached up and adjusted the collar of her pristine white chef's coat, a gesture of pure, absolute readiness. We had spent the last 6 months transforming this massive commercial space into a culinary sanctuary. We stripped away the cold, intimidating aesthetic of traditional fine dining and replaced it with rich, warm tones, exposed brick walls, and soft amber lighting. There were no velvet ropes here. There were no glass boxes designed to separate people based on their perceived social value. We built a restaurant that celebrated our culture, our history, and our authentic flavors. Tonight was the grand opening, and the entire city of Atlanta was buzzing with intense anticipation. Our reservation books had completely sold out within exactly 12 minutes of going live online. The local food critics, the hospitality industry leaders, and the most prominent culinary influencers were already lining up down the block waiting for the front doors to open. Aaliyah turned to look at me, her face glowing with a fierce, beautiful confidence. She did not look like a child seeking permission anymore. She looked like a brilliant executive chef preparing to command her own kitchen. I gave her a firm nod, and we walked together through the front entrance, stepping into the vibrant, energetic atmosphere of her new empire. The interior of the restaurant was already humming with precise, coordinated activity. The front-of-house staff moved seamlessly between the tables, polishing wine glasses and lighting the small candles at the center of each dining space. The kitchen doors swung open, and the incredible savory scent of smoked spices, roasted garlic, and slow-braised meats filled the expansive room. Aaliyah walked straight into the back, taking her rightful place at the head of the kitchen line. I stood near the host stand, watching her direct her team of experienced sous chefs and prep cooks with absolute effortless authority. She was 16 years old now, and she was commanding a multi-million-dollar kitchen with the grace of an industry veteran. At exactly 6 in the evening, we opened the doors. The restaurant filled instantly with a wave of joyous, excited energy. The sounds of laughter, clinking glasses, and enthusiastic conversations echoed beautifully off the exposed brick walls. I walked through the dining room, greeting our guests and ensuring every single detail was executed perfectly. People were absolutely captivated by the food. They closed their eyes as they tasted the bourbon peach glazed short ribs and the smoked Gouda tartlets. The same exact menu my mother had cruelly deemed too heavy and unrefined was currently bringing the city's most elite food critics to tears of sheer culinary joy. About an hour into the dinner service, the front doors opened and 2 very familiar figures walked into the bustling lobby. It was Richard and Victoria. They stepped into the warm, inviting space of the restaurant looking completely different from the tense, furious people who had stormed out of the Obsidian Room 6 months ago. Tonight they were smiling, their faces relaxed and genuinely happy to be here. They were not here as Connor's parents. They no longer associated with the disgraced bankrupt son who had lied to them for years. They were here as our primary financial investors. The business relationship had formed in the immediate aftermath of that disastrous birthday dinner. Richard had reached out to my corporate office exactly 3 days after he pulled his funding from Connor's failing startup. He requested a formal professional meeting with me. When we sat down in my boardroom, Richard did not offer apologies for his son's racist behavior or ask for any personal favors. He simply slid a thick financial portfolio across the table and told me he recognized pure, undeniable talent when he saw it. He had been absolutely mesmerized by the flavor profile Aaliyah had created that night, and he was deeply impressed by the ruthless, efficient way I managed my commercial real estate assets. Richard and Victoria had decided to redirect the massive $500,000 seed investment they had originally earmarked for Connor. They wanted to invest that capital directly into Aaliyah's new boutique restaurant. They wanted to partner with a hospitality group that possessed actual integrity, a relentless work ethic, and a product that spoke for itself. I had negotiated the terms of the investment with absolute precision, ensuring that I maintained total majority ownership and complete creative control over the brand. Richard had respected my boundaries completely. The transfer of power and respect was absolute. I walked over to the host stand to greet them personally. Richard extended his hand and gave me a firm, respectful handshake. Victoria leaned in and offered a warm, polite embrace. There was no fake high society posturing. There was no underlying tension. It was a relationship built entirely on mutual business respect and a shared appreciation for incredible talent. "This place is absolutely magnificent, Kendra," Richard said, his deep voice carrying over the lively music playing in the dining room. "The atmosphere is vibrant. The design is flawless. You have outdone yourself once again." Victoria looked toward the swinging kitchen doors, her eyes shining with anticipation. "We have been dreaming about those short ribs for 6 months," she admitted with a genuine laugh. "I have told every single one of our associates on Wall Street that they have to fly down to Atlanta just to experience this menu." Is the young executive chef holding up well under the pressure of opening night? I smiled, feeling that deep, profound maternal pride swell in my chest. "She is not just holding up, Victoria," I said, gesturing toward the dining room. "She is completely dominating the space. Please let my host show you to your table. I will have Aaliyah come out and greet you personally after the main dinner rush settles down." I watched Richard and Victoria follow the host to a premium booth near the center of the room. They sat down and immediately began engaging with the waitstaff, ordering wine and soaking in the rich, authentic culture we had built. They were comfortable. They were appreciative. They were exactly the kind of guests we wanted to serve. Later in the evening, as the final dessert courses were being cleared from the tables, Aaliyah stepped out of the kitchen. The pristine white fabric of her double-breasted coat was slightly stained with dark sauce, and her hair was damp with sweat from the intense heat of the stoves, but she looked absolutely radiant. She walked through the dining room, visiting the tables and checking on the guests. When people realized she was the executive chef, the entire restaurant spontaneously erupted into a loud, roaring round of applause. The culinary elite of the city, the food bloggers, the investors, and the local neighborhood families all stood up from their chairs and cheered for her. Aaliyah stopped in the middle of the room, her hands covering her mouth in pure shock. Tears of absolute joy spilled over her eyelashes and ran down her flushed cheeks. She bowed her head, accepting the incredible wave of validation and respect that she had earned with her own 2 hands. I stood near the bar, watching my beautiful daughter receive the standing ovation she deserved. I took a slow, deep breath of the warm, fragrant air and let the profound realization wash over me. I reflected internally on the long, painful journey that had brought us to this exact moment in time. For 35 years, I had carried the agonizing belief that I was responsible for fixing my family. I thought if I just worked harder, if I just made enough money, if I just swallowed the insults and kept the peace, I could somehow earn my mother's love. I thought I could protect her from the consequences of her own financial incompetence. I thought I could shield my sister from her own shallow delusions. But I was wrong. You cannot heal people who are absolutely committed to their own sickness. I did not destroy my family. I did not ruin their lives or orchestrate their downfall. I simply stopped being their human shield. I stopped financing their arrogance. I stopped allowing them to use my daughter as a disposable prop in their fake high society theater. The moment I stepped out of the way and let the natural consequences of their own cruelty catch up to them, their entire world collapsed under its own hollow weight. My mother, Yvonne, was currently sitting in a cramped, noisy apartment, forced to reckon with the reality that she had traded genuine maternal love for a zip code she could never actually afford. My sister Jasmine was navigating a bitter divorce from a disgraced bankrupt fraud, realizing that a designer handbag cannot keep you warm when your entire life is a lie. They were suffocating in the dark, empty ruins of their own choices, and I felt absolutely no obligation to save them. People often think that revenge has to be a loud, violent, destructive thing. They think it requires screaming matches and bitter, endless wars. But looking at Aaliyah smiling and laughing with Richard and Victoria at their table, I realized the absolute truth. The sweetest revenge was not the money. It was not the immense corporate power I held over my brother-in-law. It was not the satisfaction of handing my mother those foreclosure papers on my front porch. The sweetest, most devastating revenge was the absolute unbreakable peace I felt in my own heart. It was the beautiful, quiet realization that my daughter and I did not need to change a single thing about ourselves to be worthy of respect. We did not need to hide our culture or apologize for our working-class roots. We were always enough exactly as we were. We were the architects of our own joy. We had built an empire on a foundation of truth, hard work, and authentic love. And as I walked across the dining room to wrap my arms around my triumphant, brilliant daughter, I knew with absolute certainty that no one would ever make us eat in the back again.